In this video, we're going to be looking at the reasons why 3D printing is better than buying Warhammer or any other miniatures. Now, to set the record straight, I am an avid 3D printer. I've got a lot of videos about 3D printing on the channel. I started 3D printing in March and haven't looked back. Probably have, I don't know, like 300 plus miniatures that I've printed. And so very pro 3D printing. And I think I wasn't clear in the why buying GW models is better than 3D printing video, that I wanted to kind of try look at it from the other side, have an unbiased view, and think to myself, like, why are there some people who won't get into 3D printing but are happy to buy GW models? And so that was that video, but let's move on. So the first reason is cost. One of the things people go on about with 3D printing is that it's so much cheaper than buying models. I've probably printed the equivalent of, like, I don't know, $1,500 worth of models than if I bought them myself from the shop. And so that doesn't mean what I have is worth that much. Like, I can't sell these prints. However, it's just if I was to buy it from the shops, that's how much money I probably would have had to spend to have this kind of quantity. And so there is that saving that you make when you start 3D printing, that you can actually save a lot of money to have all these models. I've done a video on breaking down the cost of 3D printing and including things that people might not necessarily remember. Like, lots of people like talk about the printer and the cost of resin, but they don't go into all the other auxiliary items that you might have, like gloves, chemicals, some way to cure the prints, a washing liquid like IPA or something like that. Are you going to subscribe to a Patreon and pay for STLs? Are you going to get free ones and try support them yourself? You're going to use the pro version of the software or just the base version of the slicing software? And so there's just a bit more into the cost equation. All in all, 3D printing in the long run, like once you print an army or print heaps of terrain or something like that, you're already ahead and it's covered the cost of the machine. One of the tips I would have if you really do want to save money is print the big heroes and stuff like that. This Carnarex model from One Page Rules was about $4 to $5 worth of resin and then a couple of dollars for the STL. Whereas if I wanted to get the Carnifex, kind of its equivalent from Games Workshop, it was $65. And it comes in a kit of 2, so it's $130. And I get you can get the 20% discount and stuff, but there's just a huge cost disparity for big models. But there is that upfront initial cost, whereas GW, you got the convenience of that you just can buy like a squad pretty easily and get into the hobby. But then there's the thing they do where for some reason in different countries, the cost is different for GW products. And Ozspec Tactics does like a full breakdown of it, and I got the picture here. But unlucky for me, living in Australia and New Zealand, it's almost like a 50% markup when you put the currencies into their equivalent. And so that can really hamstring you if you want to get into the hobby and play Warhammer. And one person commented that they live in SEA, which I'm assuming is Southeast Asia, and the availability and lack of options that they have, as well as the increased cost, makes it very hard to get into the hobby, whereas 3D printing helps out in that. And so cost, particularly in the long run, 3D printing does win out. However, you need to invest a bit more time in some of the processes. You need to just take into account the time slicing the files, supporting them if they don't have supports, cleaning your models, curing them afterwards. There is a cost saving, but it might cost you a bit of time. There is a joy in assembling plastic kits. You could describe it almost as adult Lego. However, sometimes I find that it can be quite time consuming and frustrating to take all the pieces off the sprue, remove the mold lines and things like that, and assemble them together. I assembled the Start Collecting Flesh Eater Quartz started this year, and that was quite difficult. I struggled kind of trying to find pieces on the sprue, and it took maybe like 3 to 4 hours, and I don't know if that's like typical or not. Maybe I'm just terrible at it, but it was just quite tricky. I was doing it on stream as well, and so that might have played into account. But I remember the Octaris Orc Kill Team box, and I was assembling them, and just the way the sprues were numbered was quite, I would say, annoying. Like for example, take this. It was like put torso 17 and attach it to legs 18. And that sounds fine. Like, it's okay, they're numbered sequentially, but on the sprues themselves, they're not. You might have number 17 next to number 54 and things like that. And so the two pieces you're looking for might be on two completely different sprues. You might have to spend an extra 30, 60 minutes trying to find the pieces that you're looking for. Whereas with 3D printing, usually I print stuff in one piece, particularly if they're infantry models. So like this dude right here, that's all in one piece. Didn't have to do, I don't think I did any cleaning up, just remove the supports. Sometimes you need to like do a bit of sanding or just kind of cutting the extra support nubs that are there. You might need to fill in some gaps if supports have kind of pulled little holes out. So for some of the bigger models, you might need to print in parts and then assemble it, and there might be some gaps with some of the resin just warping and stuff like that, particularly for my printer, because I haven't really, I've like got it good enough, but there's still a bit of that warping. And so like you just need to kind of, yeah, fill those gaps. It's a lot quicker and less tedious than like removing mold lines. It can be daunting, like setting yourself up to paint your expensive $80, $100, $150 model. You know, you think to yourself, like, what if I screw it up? What if I don't do a good enough job? I'll hold off until I'm a better painter, and that thing just sits there unpainted because you're just kind of paralyzed thinking of the what ifs. Whereas with 3D printing, like, you can print parts of that model and practice what you want to do. If you make a mistake, you can reprint that part. You can reprint the whole model if you're not happy with the paint job. You don't have to worry about stripping it and stuff like that. The other thing is, if you lose or damage a model, it is easily replaced. You can just print off a new one. Whereas if with a kit or something like that, if you're missing a model or a model breaks and gluing it together would just look terrible. Very difficult to get a single model. You could probably go online, maybe find someone who's selling one model, but then usually there'd be a markup because it's just hard to get like individual models. Another big one is converting. Like if you really like converting, I've seen heaps of people do these gnarly conversions, but they can be quite expensive. Like this one guy did a Thanorc. It was like Thanos and an orc and had this cool infinity gauntlet. I wanted to copy that, but that was from a kit that was $60 and it was just for that one arm piece. And it's just like, is it really worth it for just one model? Like you really gotta love converting to do that. And it's just not worth it in my opinion. However, with 3D printing, you can find those bits or like close enough and just print those parts for a fraction of the cost. Another thing to think about is just like with 3D printing, the options are almost endless. Like it's basically limited to what you can find online and how big your build plate is. And even then you can split pieces up into parts and then attach them later on. But you can get really creative and you can find like different things that you're not limited to a select range from a certain company. But there's just, yeah, so many options out there because you have access to so many different creators via the internet. You can also scale models up or down. So if you want to do like a little Epic Games 10mm army, you could scale things down, have like pocket hammer or whatever you want to call it, and just like make things really small. And so it means you don't need as big a space, but you can still have these kind of epic battles. If you want to scale up a grot to the size of a Titan or something like that, feel free to waste all that resin, but you can do it. There's just like, there's no end to what you can do in terms of just like the way you can reorientate stuff. And just also with the kit bashing, you can like digitally kit bash the pieces together, print them out in one go, so you don't have to spend all that extra time with green stuff and things like that. So like you can get quite creative if you have that skill set. The last reason, and these kind of applications outside of wargaming, but in the hobby itself, is with my FDM printer, I printed a vat stand. So when I empty the vat or change the FEP or something like that, I can leave the vat to drip on this stand back into the bottle. I don't have to hold it there myself. I also printed this paint holder stand so my contrast and washes and stuff don't fall over, because I've knocked too many of them over. So that has been a lifesaver. The big thing is you have to remember to put the pots in the stand, because I still knocked one over when I had that stand, and that was frustrating. But there's that. And then the last thing was like one of my colleagues, their child had a Gold Rush project for school, and I was able to find an Among Us miner figure on Thingiverse, put that in Lychee Slicer, support it, print it, paint it up for them, and they could put that in their diorama. And there's just like, yeah, these extra applications that you might not think of that are so useful and versatile, which I think really opens 3D printing up to like a second hobby in itself. If you want to watch the very disliked video on why buying GW stuff is better than 3D printing, you can click over here. But just remember, I said that from a thing of why might some people not get into 3D printing. And if you want to watch another hobby related video, you can click over here. Thank you for watching and happy hobbying.